In 1847, a matron in Andover, England, was found guilty of letting starving inmates gnaw the rotting bones they were supposed to be crushing for fertilizer. Nobody went to prison. She kept her job for another year. Number 6 on this list happened in nearly every workhouse in Britain and was considered good management. Number 2 was standard practice until 1913 and would today be classified as a criminal assault on a child. These were not the actions of monsters hiding in the shadows. They were the daily routine of respectable women running government institutions, and Parliament paid their salaries to do it. Subscribe now, because what these women got away with will change how you see the phrase "good old days" forever. Number 10. Starving children on purpose as a management tool. Workhouse diets were set by law, and the law assumed that hunger kept order. The standard weekly ration for a child in many workhouses came to roughly 6,000 calories total, spread across 7 days, at a time when a growing child needed close to double that just to stay healthy. Matrons controlled the kitchen and the ladle, and inspectors documented cases where portions were quietly reduced even below the legal minimum to save money that the matron and the master could then pocket or redirect. The Andover workhouse scandal of 1845 exposed exactly this. Inmates set to crushing animal bones for fertilizer were so hungry they fought each other over the marrow still clinging to the bone. A modern matron doing this would face charges of child cruelty and neglect under the Children and Young Persons Act, plus a criminal fraud investigation for skimming public funds meant to feed the poor. Number 9. Locking children in isolation cells for hours or days. Workhouse rulebooks allowed for a punishment called the refractory cell, a bare stone room with no light, no bedding, and often no toilet, used for infractions as minor as talking during silent hours or failing to finish a task. Children as young as 7 were locked in these rooms alone, sometimes overnight, sometimes for repeated offenses, across several days. The 1866 report into the Swaffham Workhouse in Norfolk documented a 9-year-old held in isolation for nearly 48 hours over a missing button. Today, this would violate the United Kingdom's Children Act 1989 and almost certainly the Human Rights Act's prohibition on inhuman or degrading treatment, and it would trigger an immediate safeguarding investigation, not a shrug from the Board of Guardians. Number 8. Forcing children into unpaid industrial labor for hours a day. The workhouse system ran on child labor disguised as moral training. Boys picked oakum, tearing apart old tar-soaked rope fiber by fiber until their fingers bled. For up to 10 hours a day, girls scrubbed floors, did laundry for the entire institution, and worked in kitchens that served hundreds. This was not vocational education. It was unpaid industrial output extracted from children as young as 5, and matrons enforced quotas with the threat of the birch or a missed meal. Under modern UK employment and child labour law, this would constitute forced labour of a minor, a serious criminal offence that would end with prosecution, not a positive mention in the parish minutes. Number 7. Physically beating children with birch rods and canes. Corporal punishment was written directly into the workhouse rulebook, and matrons were among those authorised to administer it. The birch, a bundle of hardened twigs, left welts that could last for weeks. Official logs from institutions like the Southwell Workhouse recorded dozens of beatings a year for offences like bedwetting, stammering when answering a question, or simply crying too loudly. Some matrons kept personal tallies of punishments delivered, treating it as a badge of discipline rather than something to hide. A woman striking a child hard enough to raise welts today would be arrested for assault, and any institution allowing it would lose its license within days. First pattern break. Everything so far has targeted children specifically, and that is not an accident of research. Roughly a third of everyone inside a Victorian workhouse on any given day was under the age of 16, and matrons were legally designated as the primary disciplinarians of that population. What comes next moves beyond children into how these women controlled entire families, the sick and the elderly. And this is where the abuses get harder to defend as simple product of a harsher era. Number 6. deliberately separating husbands, bits, and children on arrival. The 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act mandated strict segregation. Men, women, and children over 7 were housed in entirely separate wings and were often forbidden from speaking to each other, except during a brief, supervised hour once a week, if that. Matrons enforced this separation inside the female and children's quarters with particular rigidity, sometimes preventing a mother from comforting a sick child in a different ward even when death was imminent. Couples who had been married for decades were split apart the moment they entered the gates, purely to save on housing costs and enforce discipline. Under current UK family and human rights law, forcibly separating a family without a court order, especially a dying child from a parent, would be an immediate scandal and a lawsuit, not routine intake procedure. Number 5. Withholding medical treatment from the sick and dying. Workhouse infirmaries were chronically understaffed, and matrons often controlled who actually saw the visiting doctor and who did not, by rationing access the same way they rationed food. Inmates too weak to argue or too low in the informal pecking order of the ward were frequently left without treatment for treatable conditions like dysentery, typhus, or infected wounds. The 1866 Lancet investigation into London workhouse infirmaries documented patients lying in their own waste for days because staff, including the matron's own appointees, simply did not come. Today, this level of medical neglect inside a care institution would trigger a Care Quality Commission investigation, potential manslaughter charges, and the immediate closure of the facility. Number 4, publicly humiliating inmates through forced haircuts and uniforms. On arrival, women and girls frequently had their hair cut, short or shaved, ostensibly for hygiene, though the timing and manner often served a different purpose entirely, marking them visibly as inmates and stripping away one of the few things a poor woman had left that was hers. Everyone was issued a rough, ill-fitting uniform designed to be instantly recognizable in the surrounding town, so that going outside the walls meant being publicly identified as destitute. Matrons oversaw this process personally in the female wards and had wide discretion over how it was carried out. Modern safeguarding and dignity in care standards explicitly prohibit humiliating or degrading treatment of vulnerable people in institutional care, and this practice would be shut down immediately by any regulator. Number 3, punishing unmarried mothers far more harshly than other inmates. Women who arrived pregnant outside of marriage, then called fallen women, were subjected to a distinct and harsher regime under many matrons' personal discretion. They were often assigned the dirtiest labor, given smaller rations, and in some institutions forced to wear a distinguishing yellow dress specifically to mark their moral status to everyone else inside the workhouse. Some matrons took it upon themselves to lecture and shame these women repeatedly as a form of moral correction, treating an already vulnerable new mother as a problem to be punished rather than a patient to be cared for. This kind of discriminatory treatment based on marital and reproductive status would today violate equality law outright and result in immediate disciplinary action against any care worker who attempted it. Second pattern break. By this point in the list, a clear picture emerges. Almost none of what these matrons did was against the actual law of their time. Parliament wrote the rule books. Local boards of guardians approved the punishments. Matrons were, in a strange sense, model employees operating exactly within the system built around them. The final 2 entries on this list are the ones that shocked even contemporary Victorian reformers, the abuses so severe that newspapers of the era, not modern historians, were the first to demand prosecution. Number 2, allowing or directing physical restraint that amounted to torture. In workhouses that housed what the era called imbeciles or lunatics, often simply people with epilepsy, learning disabilities, or untreated mental illness, matrons had authority over restraint methods used to keep order in overcrowded wards with almost no trained staff. Investigations uncovered cases of inmates left tied to beds or chairs for entire days, sometimes strapped into straitjacket-style garments, not because of any medical necessity, but because it was simply easier than supervising them. The 1859 investigation into the Bethnal Green Workhouse Infirmary found patients restrained so long that they developed pressure sores and muscle wasting. Under today's Mental Capacity Act and Mental Health Act, Unauthorized restraint of this kind is a criminal offense, and any care worker responsible would face prosecution and a lifetime ban from working with vulnerable people. Number 1, financial fraud through skimming rations and supplies for personal profit. This is the accusation that actually did occasionally land a matron in real legal trouble, because unlike cruelty to the poor, defrauding the parish touched money that respectable ratepayers cared about. Matrons controlled the ordering and distribution of food, coal, clothing, and medical supplies, and several notorious cases, including the Andover scandal that opened this list, revealed matrons and masters selling workhouse provisions on the side, serving inferior food while billing for superior food, and pocketing the difference for years before anyone noticed. The fraud worked precisely because inmates had no voice, no visitors checking on them, and no way to report what they were actually being fed. Today, this would be prosecuted as theft, fraud, and corporate manslaughter if deaths resulted, carrying real prison time rather than a quiet transfer to another parish. What ties all 10 of these together is not individual cruelty. It is a system that handed enormous unchecked power to one woman per institution over people with no legal voice, no advocates, and nowhere else to go. The matrons were not uniquely evil. They were ordinary women operating inside rules written by men who never had to live under them, enforcing standards that a modern courtroom would recognize instantly as criminal. So, here is the question worth sitting with. What parts of our own systems, the ones we consider normal right now, will the next generation look back on the exact same way? Let me know in the comments which entry on this list surprised you the most, and stick around, because the story of what finally ended the workhouse system is even stranger than how it began.